I'm Julie Herman of Jaybird Quilts and Lazy Girl Designs, and welcome to the Cuppa Tea video tutorial series. These videos will be available ongoing to assist you in the process of making your own Cuppa Tea quilt, and in the case of today's video, Cuppa Tea Pillow. I have a couple videos on the Cuppa Tea Pillow, and in today's video, I'm going to focus on the backing for the pillow and how we attach the backing and bind and finish our pillow. So let's just jump right on in. The Teapot Pillow is a bonus as a part of the Cuppa Tea book. In our previous videos, I went ahead and showed you how to miter the corners when putting on your borders and gave you an option for quilting. And before I get started on showing you how we're going to make the back of the pillow and finish it, I want to show you I quilted another one. So this one is the one that I quilted and filmed and showed you the video. I did the echoing around the star. I did this one by machine, and then I opted to do this one by hand. And so I did not record this one because I did it on the couch, just kind of hanging out, relaxing at night. But I echoed around, so similar to what I did here, but I also went inside the shapes. And it's subtle because I used thread that matched the pillow, but I'm going to show you the back because it's not subtle on the back, so you can really just kind of see what I did. And a cool thing about this is because this is a pillow, is you don't have to worry about the back. When you are normally hand quilting or doing things, you need to make sure that you bury your threads and you don't have things showing. But this is really a great project to try things on because there's a lot of flexibility. So all of this can just kind of hang out and be as it is. So I just used 3 strands of standard embroidery floss and did kind of like a big running stitch. They're probably about a 1/4 inch apart, about a 1/4 inch long, give or take. I didn't measure, I wasn't precise, I just kind of had fun with it. As I talked about in the other video, you really just need to know your batting and how far apart it needs to be quilted. And this batting did not need a ton of quilting, so this is more than enough, but I'm totally okay having these big areas unquilted. So now that I have that done, it's time to make the back and bind my pillow. You need to cut 2 rectangles, and the measurements for those are on page 65 in the book. And then you want to go ahead and finish 2 edges. Those are going to be the 2 edges that form the envelope pocket of the pillow. So I'm simply going to take some sewing clips, and I don't press at this stage for this step. You can if you want to, but you simply want to fold about a 1/4 inch and then a 1/4 inch. If it's closer to 3/8 and 3/8, that's fine. I wouldn't go over a 1/2 and a 1/2 just because you don't want to have, if you did like huge ones, then the space between your envelope is going to get small and your pillow could kind of like pop out, your pillow form. So I simply just eyeball it and fold it over and clip it in place. And you want to do that on one long edge from each one of the rectangles. And as you can see, it's kind of, popping up here, and that's okay because we're just going to head on over to the machine and simply top stitch this. I like to do it with just a straight stitch with coordinating thread at 3.0. So go ahead and clip both and top stitch. I've gone ahead and done that already with my other 2 backing pieces since I'm making 2 pillows. So one of my backs I decided to use the green and one I decided to use the purple. Hopefully they'll kind of look fun on the bed together with the finished quilt. So as you can see here, gone ahead, top stitched. So now the next step is we need to layer our project. There's 2 primary ways to finish a pillow, with and without binding. I designed this pillow to be finished with binding. If you want to finish it without binding, that's totally fine. Without binding, you're simply going to place your 2 rectangles right sides to your pillow, sew around, flip it, you're done. But since we want to add binding, we don't want to start right sides together. We want to start wrong sides together. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by layering our first rectangle raw edges up and to the sides, our second rectangle raw edges to the sides and the bottom. And these are going to overlap. And you don't have to form a perfect square right now. We're just kind of laying it in place to get kind of an eyeball for where we're going. Then you're going to take your pillow. Now, don't be nervous if your backing is a little bit wider than your pillow. It's better to be large than small. If it's small, we got a problem. It's probably larger because what we talked about after the quilting of the other one, things shrink during quilting. So my pillow might now just be more like 20 instead of 20.5, which is fine. We're gonna go ahead and trim that excess off. So now that I have things layered, wrong side up, and right side up so that it's how I want it finished, I'm gonna go ahead and flip the whole project over. It's easier to work from the back at this point. And I'm going to use my sewing clips. Now I wanna start, I'm just gonna kind of roll this one out of the way for a minute. And if you're worried that it's gonna get like knocked off and then you're not going to remember where, you can kind of just clip it, just 2 loose clips that are not exactly where we need them to be, and that's okay. Let me move this up so you can see it. So what we want to do is we want to pick one of the 2 corners. If your piece is the right width, then you're just going to line it up with all 3 sides. But since mine is only going to line up with 2 because it's extra wide because of that shrinkage, I'm just going to simply line it up here and here. Just kind of move it around as needed. And simply going to take some sewing clips and clip. And I'm going to do this all the way around. And now when I get over here, I want to make sure that I don't end up kind of folding that under. It's not the end of the world, but it just adds extra bulk. I'm just gonna loosely clip it over here. I can go ahead and baste along the edge and then cut off that extra fabric there. So now I have my bottom one is perfectly clipped in place. So I'm going to slide it back down so you can see my top now. So I'm going to unroll it back out and take these clips off. And since I chose to align with the right, I'm going to stick with the right. It doesn't really make sense to have half of your extra over here and half of your extra over here. It makes sense to just keep it all to one side. So I'm just going to line this up in my upper right corner. And again, add some clips, and then I'll just open these up to just add this additional layer in there. And then just make sure I'm lined up at the top. And what's most important here is that you are just staying square. You don't want to have a wonky line on the back of your pillow. That would not be so attractive, and you've worked really hard to get it to where it is, so you want it to look good. A couple more clips over here, and then open these back up. Okay, so I'm going to flip it over now so that you can see what it looks like from the other side. So on 3 of our sides, on our top, our left, and our bottom, we are just clipped flush, and on our right, we have about 1/2 inch here. So I'm going to head on over to the machine, and I'm going to baste around this. And what that's going to do is that's just going to hold all 3 of my layers together so nothing shifts. And then after everything is basted together and all of my clips are off, I'm going to go ahead and put on my binding. So let's head on over to the machine to baste all of this in place. I'm over here at my machine. I suggest using a walking foot for this step if you have one, and make your stitch length as long as your machine will allow. I'm putting mine at a 6.0. Anywhere 4.0, 5.0 works good. You just want nice long stitch length, no need to take time to make it any shorter. And we're just going to go ahead and sew around, and then we will trim off this excess. I do like to begin where the piece is overlapped. I find that sometimes if I start somewhere else when I get here, accidentally this can get kind of flipped under. So I like to start here so that I know that I'll be all good. Even though if that happens, we're basting right now, we're not sewing, it is going to be easy to take these stitches out if you need to fix something like that. So I'm simply going to just start right here, and I'm doing this about 1/8 inch from the edge. It's very similar to the line that I did to baste around my entire border before I trimmed it, the excess batting and backing. I'm going to baste around the project and remove my clips as I go. Now I have reached the side that has my extra fabric. So as I take my clips out, I'm just going to kind of flatten this out so I don't end up accidentally kind of bunching that under there or ending up with a fold, something I don't want, or that wrapping. So I'm just going to kind of take a clip out as I go and make sure to keep this nice and flat, and then I'll trim that excess off. Now that I have everything basted, I like to just flip it to the back and just check to make sure that I'm all good, because if you're not, this is an opportunity to pause and take it off before you go ahead and trim off your excess. It looks like things moved a little bit here, but that's all going to be covered with the binding, so I'm not really worried about something as minor as that. So I could head over to my cutting board and trim this, or I can just grab a pair of scissors to trim it. And since I'm sitting here, I'm just going to use a pair of scissors. Now that it's trimmed, it's time to go ahead and bind it. First thing I want to do, so I don't forget, is I want to change my thread. I went ahead and picked a thread that's going to match my binding. The thread that I have in my machine is a purple that I used for top stitching my fabrics on the back. So I'm just going to simply take this off, set this aside, and load my machine with the green. And this is especially important if you plan on finishing your pillow completely by machine. If you are going to do part by machine, part by hand, the thread color that you first sew it on with is not as essential. It can be seen, but if you're going to do it all by machine, you definitely want to make sure that you have thread that matches your binding color. So I have my machine loaded, and one thing I personally always like to do when I get my machine loaded with new thread is just to sew on a scrap. Sometimes, you know, you didn't catch something in one of the loopers or something happened, and so I like to go ahead and sew on a scrap. So I'm going to do that real quick. And just pull that out of the way so that I know everything is good to go. And now I have multiple choices with my binding. I can go ahead and sew it onto the front by machine and wrap it to the back and hand sew it in place. I can sew it onto the front by machine and machine sew it onto the back. Or I can do what I'm going to do, which is I'm going to machine sew it onto the back and then wrap to the front. It's the same thing that I did with the quilt itself, so I think that it will look good together with the quilt. And I just realized that I have not yet cut any of the ends of my binding. I like to have the end of my binding already cut at a 45 degree before I go ahead and sew it onto my quilt or my pillow. So I'm simply going to just do that real quick. After I cut my 45 degree angle, I realized that I had not yet pressed my binding in half, and I prefer to have it pressed in half before sewing it on. So I turned on my iron and pressed my binding in half. And now I am back to putting it on my pillow. So as I mentioned, I am going to start by sewing it onto the back and then wrap it to the front. So I'm going to begin about 5-6 inches after my tail, and I'm going to leave the tail somewhere where I can reach it. So when I'm on a pillow specifically, I like to kind of start close to a corner so that I'll be able to leave a big area to be able to match the seam. You don't want to be too tight when you're having those tails. So I just start kind of close to a corner, and I am just going to go ahead and get this lined up and sew this on with a 1/4 inch seam, and we're going to miter our corners. And if you've never seen me do it before, I'll show you how. So we're going to stop when we're 1/4 inch from our edge, and I'm just going to go back a couple stitches and then put my presser foot up. And then I want to take my binding, this part, and I want to go away from where I am headed next. So if it's a 60 degree project, it'll look a little different, but since this is 90, we're going to have a 45 degree angle there, and then this is now a straight line across here, and then I fold it back onto itself. So I have this little floppy triangle that I'm going to keep flat for now. And if it helps you to pin or clip this, you can go ahead and do that. And you're just going to turn and then start sewing here. Now, one thing I do find helpful is instead of starting off the project and going on, which can sometimes shift that miter, is I like to start a little bit on my project, maybe like between 1/4 and 1/2 inch, and back stitch. And so I sew basically backwards and then back on my project. And that way it doesn't shift. I find that it just helps to keep it better where we want it to be. Okay, so now I am almost back to where I started. So I am going to go ahead and remove my project from my sewing machine. Going to cut this one to match up with this one. And how we're going to do that is we're going to take our ending tail, which is our longer one, and we're going to lay it flush with the edge of our project. And then we're simply going to open it up. And then we're going to take the starting tail and lay it down into it. And so that we want to make sure that all of our raw edges here stay flush along the edge. You want to make sure you don't go in or out, so you keep things nice and as straight as you can. Kind of fold this excess out of the way if you have a lot of it. Grab a pencil or something you can mark with. And you're going to draw a line right where the raw edge of this piece lands on this piece. So there's my line. And now what I need to do is I need to add a 1/2 inch to that. That 1/2 inch is going to account for a 1/4 inch on this piece and a 1/4 inch on the other piece, so that I have what I need in my seam allowance to go ahead and piece these together, so that you will never be able to tell where I started and stopped my binding, and it'll have a nice, perfect, clean edge where they join together. There are other ways to do this that involve just sticking one inside the other, but I don't really like the bulk that comes out with. All right, so you should now have 2 lines, and you want to cut with either scissors or rotary cutter on the second line, on the line that's closest to the end, so that you don't cut the seam allowances off. All right, so now that we have those, it's time to go ahead and join them together. So I'm going to pinch them, and we can kind of make our pillow, since it's soft, we can make this kind of go up so that we can pinch these together and keep them oriented correctly. You want to make sure you don't somehow end up twisting this one and one ends up wrong. Doesn't happen often, but it happens on occasion. So you want to make sure that you keep them how they should be aligned, and kind of fold your pillow in half for a moment, and then you want to line these up with the dog ears off, so that a 1/4 inch is from valley down here to valley. If it helps you to pin these, you can go ahead and do that. I don't find that I need to pin them, but you can go ahead and do that if it helps you out. So I'm just gonna get these lined back up. And once I get a couple stitches in, I can usually get the bottom part nice and lined up. Okay, so this is what it looks like now, and I don't usually turn my iron on for just this little part. I will usually just press it open. If you have a seam roller, that can be handy to kind of just press that open. Definitely want to press it open rather than to the side to eliminate bulk, and then press that seam back in it, and then just sew down the length of this to complete sewing the binding on. Now the binding is completely sewn on, and I'm just going to take my scissors real quick to trim off any of the dog ears that exist, the 2 that I just made from attaching my binding, as well as any that were left on from when I made my binding. Now we're going to flip it back to the front and go ahead and clip some of the binding in place before we are going to top stitch it to finish our pillow. I really like to have clean, crisp corners when possible, and I will show you my trick for getting them nice and clean and crisp. I'm going to start by putting in 2 or 3 clips on either side close to the corner, and that way I have things kind of already going in the direction that I want them to go in. I like to pull my binding not super taut where it's too tight or rolling over, but I like to pull it tight. Some people put the edge of the binding on the stitching, and then you kind of have this like gap of air in here. I like to pull my binding nice and tight so that if you feel along the binding, every part of the binding is full of batting. I hope that makes sense. You just kind of want it to have the same nice thickness everywhere. So now we have the corner. And what I like to do here is what I call split the bulk. And that is going to give you the nicest, flattest corner. So what that means is here on the front, our bulk is over here on the left. And that's from when we folded and made our miter. So if we folded this side first and then this side, we'd be making more bulk on the left, and we'd have a lot of bulk on the left and not a lot of bulk on the right. So what I like to do is whichever side has the bulk on the front, which is usually the left, I fold that side over first, and then I fold the right side over. And so what this does, if you can look, is it has the bulk over here and then the bulk over here. So by splitting the bulk, you're making this as flat as possible. So once I have that in place, I like to take a couple clips and put one on either side of that to keep it in place until I'm ready to either hand or machine stitch it. When I have something this small, I'll usually clip the whole project. When I'm working on a big quilt, I often won't clip the whole project, but I do tend to clip all 4 corners before beginning They are the kind of thing that I like to do when the project is free of the sewing machine. Sometimes you see people like clipping as they go, and I can do that for a straightaway, but for a corner, I like to have mobility to move it around and do whatever I need to do to make it as nice and clean and crisp as possible. So I am going to go ahead and clip all 4 corners and then begin sewing this onto the pillow. I have finished clipping my binding all around my pillow, so now it is time to top stitch it in place. And this is when you want to make sure that you have thread in your sewing machine that matches, because you are going to see it on the front. It's also going to show up on the back just past the edge of the binding. So in this case, I could put purple in my bobbin and green in my top. I'm just going to stick with green because it won't bother me that I'm going to see a tiny little green line there on the back of a pillow. But if it will bother you, make sure that your bobbin thread matches your backing. I'm going to go ahead and sew on a scrap because I don't want to begin on my project in case I end up with that thread nest that you get. I like to be able to pull my threads off into the back, and by having them on a piece of fabric, it makes it really easy to be able to pull both threads together. I am simply going to, let's decide. All right, let's begin on the what is technically the bottom. It doesn't really matter where you begin. I'm going to take one clip out so that I'll be able to slide this under my project, and I'm going to do a 3.0 stitch length, and I want to stay just right on the edge. Before the edge, I don't want to come off, but I don't want to be too far into my project. So I am just going to go right along the edge. And one thing I do find helpful at this point is a stiletto. So I'll remove my clips as I go, and then the binding has a tendency to want to creep this way, and I can use the stiletto to kind of hold it where I need it to be. So I'm just going to simply begin nice and slow and just take those clips out as I go. And if you're worried about this, you can press it in place first, or I have found, I just finished clipping this, if you clip it in advance, like a day or two in advance, the clips almost work like an iron, and they kind of press things in place and give it a memory. And so if you're not in a hurry, you can go ahead and clip it and then wait a day or two, and then when you take the clip off, it won't flip up as much as you see mine doing here. Just another little option there for you. When I get to my corners, I like to pivot with my needle down. I find that things shift less. So if you have a function on your machine of being able to keep your needle down, but lifting your presser foot up a little bit, I like that because I find that it keeps things nice and crisp. I've reached back where I begun, so I'm just going to sew over it a little bit and backstitch, and there we go. And I'll show you what it looks like on the back. And so like I said, just have a little bit of a line of stitching right inside, and it doesn't bother me that mine is green. So the only thing left to do is to pop in our pillow form. I hope you found this video on making the backing and binding your pillow helpful. If you have any questions, please ask those in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like it and subscribe to the channel. And if you've not yet signed up for the sew along where we're going to make the Cuppa Tea Quilt and the pillow this fall, I encourage you to do that. Information is also in the caption below, and we look forward to sewing along with you and seeing the pillows and quilts that you make.